Hello, you're watching Special Report here on TVI World. My name is Rahmat Idris. We come to you from the beautiful city of Rio de Janeiro, the capital of Brazil. Today, we have entered the second and the final day of the G20 Rio Summit. The first day today has unfolded quite successfully, with world leaders sitting at the table discussing some of the most pertinent issues for the world right now. And when we talk about the G20s, these are the entity that comprises of some of the biggest economies in the world. And these world leaders have congregated here in the city of Rio de Janeiro to address some of the basic principles, the three key pillars that have been put forward that have become the main idea under the Brazilian presidency of the G20 this year. One big theme has been put forward by the Brazilian government with the helm of the president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, which is building a just world and sustainable planet. And this very big theme has then been translated into three big pillars that have become the main key points of discussions and deliberations for all the world leaders within the G20. We know that the G20 comprises of 19 big economies, the countries plus two unions. At this time, we have the European Union and African Union all sitting at the table, including all the invited leaders from around the globe, which are not within the membership of the G20 per se, but make up for a very significant contributions with their presence and appearance here at the G20 summit alongside invited leaders of world organizations. The three key issues that have been put forward by the government of Brazil under their G20 presidency this year is first, social inclusion, the fight against hunger, the fight against poverty, and then the second pillar that they put forward is the sustainable energy transitions and sustainable developments. And the third one is a rather important one. This is the reform of global finance institutions and global institutions worldwide, which pertains to some of the biggest organizations out there. Now, let's talk about day one that has unfolded yesterday in the summit. There's a lot of attentions. We have covered the event starting from the arrivals of these world leaders hailing from different parts of the globe to Rio de Janeiro, and it began with such a high note here in Rio de Janeiro. First sessions of the leaders meeting of the summit of G20 yesterday unfolded touching on the subject of fighting against hunger and poverty. With that, President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has come up with one of the biggest achievements under the presidency of Brazil this year, which is the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. It was so proud of this initiative. At the end of his remarks for the opening ceremony yesterday, President Lula da Silva said that 81 countries have signed on in this initiative, and 9 financial institutions have also been a part of this Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. Why is this important? Well, he mentions in the initial parts of his special remarks some of the most staggering facts in the world. He mentioned that throughout the year 2024, the Food and Agricultural Organizations, or FAO, of the United Nations have divulged the statistics that over 700 million people are suffering from malnutrition throughout the year 2024, and this is not justified. And with that, he said that it's not that because we are lacking in food productions, but we are lacking in equal distributions. He said, and he mentioned, that over 6 billion food is produced every single year, more than enough to feed everyone, but not everyone is given equal access to it. And as I'm speaking right now, we are waiting for the final moment today with all eyes right here in Brazil to see how much have these world leaders agree on and how much more that they have not yet been able to achieve. Behind me right now, if I can look closely, is the last remarks from the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, who is currently leading and chairing the final leaders meeting session of the summit, which is touching on energy transition and sustainable development. And right after this particular session, all the world's leaders will embark upon the final session of the G20 Rio Summit here in Rio de Janeiro, which is the closing session of the leaders meeting, and more importantly, the handover of presidency. Right now, it is under the helm of the Brazilian government with the President Lula da Silva behind me speaking, and then later on, it will be handed over to the President of South Africa as the next presidency of the G20, President Cyril Ramaphosa. Right. While he's delivering his remarks, we believe concluding the third sessions of leaders meetings of the G20 summit, right now, let's go over again at some of the most important key points that the Brazilian government have been able to put on the table for the discussions of these world leaders. He said, and he mentions that the global alliances of these countries against hunger and poverty is a very, very important milestone for the G20, and indeed it is a high mark. It is such a big achievement for the G20 presidency under the Brazilian government. He said that with this, we'll be able to encourage the growth of food industry, food productions, and more importantly, food distributions to those in need. I'd like to go over again, while we wait for the closing session to start, on the end of day one, because a very important joint declarations was discussed yesterday throughout the day. We know that two very important sessions took place yesterday. The first one is the launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, which has been agreed on by 81 countries. A lot of them are within the G20 members and outside. But also the agreements on the two key issues for the next part of the day, which is touching on the global governance, the reform of global governance institutions. And now we are talking some of the biggest organizations out there that needs to be reformed in accordance to President Lula da Silva of Brazil. And this will pertain to organizations such as the World Bank, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and also the WTO, World Trade Organization, and more importantly, the UN Security Council. And it's been said that agreements have been reached toward certain key points of the principles of the G20 presidency. They agree on fight against hungers. They agree on the taxations for the wealthiest on the planet. They agree also on the points for the reform of global governance institutions. But then again, out of all of these member states of the G20, one of them did not endorse the joint declaration yesterday, and it was Argentina. Argentina, through its presidents, has said that they challenge some of the words that have been put in the draft of the declaration yesterday. And after much discussions and deliberations, Argentina decided to withdraw and not endorse the joint declaration yesterday, touching on fights against hunger and also poverty, and also the reform of global governance institutions. Well, there have been quite a doubt, for lack of better words, towards the outcome of the summit today under the leaderships of President Lula da Silva. They mentioned that with the escalating geopolitical tensions around the globe right now, and also the fact that a lot of disagreements between the members of the G20 and the absence of some of the key world leaders, for example, Vladimir Putin, who has always been represented by the foreign affairs ministers of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, at least in the past 3 years since the conflict in Ukraine started a couple of years ago. And that has been very difficult. It has been such a thorn on the side of each presidency of the G20. But then again, with the agreements that have touched on some of the most key principles of the G20 this year, the presidency of Brazil is considered a success. even though not all of the member states endorsed on the leaders' declaration yesterday. We are looking at the latest visuals right now. If you're paying attention to a live stream there from the G20 Brazil, the official stream from the committee, and it is clear to see that they are preparing for the fourth and final session of the day, which is the closing sessions of the leaders' meeting of the G20, to be followed by the handover of presidency from Brazil to South Africa. We are waiting for moments of the closing session to begin. All right, while we wait for more words from the organizers, it's been pushed a little bit. It was initially planned for the closing session to start a little over 20 minutes ago here at the we are right in the thick of it, in the international media center of the G20 Rio summit, which is in the neighborhood, in the area of the Museum of Modern Art, which is the main venue of the G20 Rio summit this year. And while we wait for those moments, I'd like to go over some of the key events that our President Prabowo Subianto has been involved in yesterday. We were right there at the place where he stayed in here in the city of Rio de Janeiro, which is the Hilton Copacabana Hotel, and where he also hosts some key bilateral meetings with our very important partners within the G20 and also outside of the G20, but we're also present here in Brazil. One notable meeting was held on the first day, a day before the opening of the summit, with President Prabowo Subianto having a bilateral one-on-one meeting with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The President of Indonesia, he mentioned that he saluted the stance of the United Nations against fight for climate change, and also against conflicts and war, especially pertaining to the ones in Ukraine and the ones in Middle East right now, talking about Palestine and Lebanon there. And also one key issue that was put on the table in the bilateral meeting between Indonesia and the United Nations was also on the climate change, which is something that is happening concurrently as we speak right now with the Conference of Parties, or COP29, in Baku, Azerbaijan. Right. While we wait for more of the confirmations when the closing session will start, we put together some of the final reports that we've had in the past few days, particularly yesterday, involving different working groups and ministerial meetings, as the main idea that are brought over to the presidential level, which is the leaders' meeting that happened on the 18th yesterday and on the final day on the 19th today. Take a look at some of these reports.
Esse é o primeiro G20 em que a gente faz G20 social. É o primeiro G20 que a gente faz G20 cultural. É o primeiro G20 que a gente tenta repartir com a sociedade.
G20 é a união dos 20 maiores países, das potências, né, do nosso mundo. Então, nesse momento, a gente, quanto favela, está tendo a oportunidade de ampliar nossas vozes e falar que, bom, então vocês precisam olhar para a gente, que é a base de toda essa cadeia.
Esses eventos, elas é uma oportunidade da gente jogar a atenção do mundo, né, nos problemas mais sérios que tem, desde o nível macro do mundo inteiro até o micro, que são as pessoas que vão realmente implementar isso no dia a dia.
Depois da iniciativa inédita do Brasil de incluir povos do mundo no G20, que foi um sucesso na Praça Mauá, o Rio de Janeiro está pronto para receber lideranças das maiores economias e convidados aqui no Museu de Arte Moderna. A cidade maravilhosa reforçou sua segurança e decretou feriado para marcar no calendário esse momento que irá definir o futuro do mundo. Durante toda a presidência do Brasil no G20, que começou em dezembro do ano passado, diversas reuniões técnicas, ministeriais e sociais aconteceram no Rio. No mês de novembro, com a cúpula do G20 Social e a de líderes, que acontece entre os dias 18 e 19, a estimativa é de que a cidade receba mais de 120 mil pessoas.
Para a economia local, mais de 400 milhões, geração de emprego e renda e uma enorme possibilidade que as pessoas reconheçam o Brasil como lugar que tem segurança, que tem bons aeroportos, que tem hospedagem, que tem uma gastronomia, que tem um receptivo e é capaz de receber não só os líderes, mas o planeta inteiro.
O Rio é a vitrine do Brasil no mundo e a gente quer que o país inteiro se sinta representado aqui nessa cidade. A gente sente muito orgulho de ser a cara do Brasil para o mundo. Viva o Rio, viva o Brasil, viva o G20. Bem-vindos todos.
Eu espero da sociedade mais diversidade.
Eu quero um mundo com mais educação,
Com acessibilidade,
Mais amor ao próximo.
Mais respeito às mulheres.
O povo pode fazer um mundo novo e melhor. E isso, esta presidência do Brasil sempre soube. Por essa razão, inovou e formou no G20 o histórico Grupo de Cooperação Internacional das Maiores Economias, o G20 Social. Uma terceira trilha que, junto às tradicionais trilhas de Sherpas e de finanças, dá espaço para o debate popular. Nestes meses, com debates dos 13 grupos de engajamento, de movimentos sociais e populares, o G20 Social promoveu não só a escuta atenta à sociedade, mas também novos modelos de cooperação, de parceria internacionais e de pactos globais. E agora é a hora de fazer acontecer. Essa semana, na Cúpula Social, povos do mundo se reúnem no Rio de Janeiro para construir juntos suas propostas, que serão entregues aos líderes das nações do G20. G20 Social é legado presente e futuro, porque o povo pode.
No centro das nossas prioridades está a luta contra as desigualdades em todas as suas formas.
Chegamos aos últimos meses da presidência brasileira do G20. Foram diversas pautas, debates, reuniões e consensos que, de fato, deixaram marcas positivas na vida das pessoas. Entre essas marcas, o empoderamento feminino. Há 25 anos, o G20 era criado. O objetivo de sua criação foi ter um espaço onde nações desenvolvidas e países em desenvolvimento, o chamado Sul Global, debatessem soluções às crises financeiras. Em 2008, sua atuação foi ampliada para temas referentes ao desenvolvimento econômico e social sustentável. São anos de G20, e a primeira recomendação para mulheres na Declaração de Líderes ocorreu apenas em 2012. A pauta de gênero só esteve, de fato, incluída na agenda do G20 com a criação do Grupo de Trabalho de Empoderamento de Mulheres em 2023, durante a presidência indiana, e se consolidou sob a presidência do Brasil em 2024, em que aconteceram suas primeiras reuniões.
Nós temos 3 pautas prioritárias, né? Uma é a discussão da igualdade, e a igualdade passa pela questão da igualdade salarial entre homens e mulheres, passa pela política do cuidado, enfrentar o ódio contra as mulheres, todas as discriminações, todos os preconceitos e a questão da justiça climática.
Com esses temas definidos como prioridade do GT de empoderamento de mulheres, o Brasil endossou a importância de se elencar a promoção de equidade de gênero na agenda internacional. Além dos importantes avanços nas reuniões do GT, a presidência e o Ministério das Mulheres do Brasil ampliaram um diálogo com os demais grupos de trabalho do G20, para que a busca de igualdade entre mulheres e homens guiasse os diversos debates. Assim, encerramos nossos trabalhos oferecendo total apoio à presidência sul-africana. que com certeza vai consolidar e avançar na promoção dos direitos das mulheres. Juntas e juntos, vamos construir o mundo de igualdade que queremos, que merecemos.
Enquanto houver famílias sem comida na mesa, crianças nas ruas e jovens sem esperança, não haverá paz.
We promised to eliminate extreme poverty and hunger until 2030. However, far from falling at the necessary pace, hunger and poverty are growing. If all the efforts made over the past decades to combat hunger and poverty have proven insufficient, a new approach is necessary and urgent. With Brazil chairing the G20, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva convened a task force to consider actions to change this reality. 5 reports were produced by international organizations with a clear diagnosis. Although the evidence strongly favors large-scale public programs and policies against hunger and poverty, the international community's support is increasingly oriented towards small pilot and temporary projects, leading to a fragmented and challenging scenario. And the world needs more, much more than that.
And I welcome the Hunger and Poverty Alliance being launched by President Lula. Hunger has no place in the 21st century.
The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, an innovative initiative whose founding documents were approved by the G20 in July 2024, brings together countries, international organizations, and entities committed to creating a focused and action-oriented coalition. Many countries have successfully implemented policies and programs against hunger and poverty. We already know what works.
And you are still watching a special report here coming to you from the International Media Center in the city of Rio de Janeiro, where currently we have entered the second and final day of the G20 Rio Summit. And we have received words that the closing sessions as well as the handover presidency from Brazil to South Africa has been underway a few minutes ago, with the final remarks made by the President of Brazil, Lula da Silva. He iterated on some of the most important achievements and objectives that the presidency of Brazil has managed to achieve, and also with pride hand over the presidency from Brazil to President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa. Now, this is interesting because these two leaders are including in the leadership of Troika of the G20, meaning that the 3 triangles of the current presidents, or rather the past presidents, the Brazil presidency under President Lula da Silva, and another one from 2023, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, and President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. And now we have the footage of the very important closing sessions and also the handover of presidency from the officials of the organizers. Take a look at the moment of the closing session.
Promover a igualdade racial. Definimos princípios chaves sobre comércio e desenvolvimento sustentável e adotamos o compromisso de triplicar a capacidade global de energias renováveis até 2030. Criamos uma coalizão para a produção local e regional de vacinas e medicamentos e decidimos expandir o financiamento para infraestruturas de água e saneamento. Sediamos o evento da rodada de investimento da Organização Mundial da Saúde, por acreditar que mais recursos são necessários para uma resposta coletiva a novos e persistentes desafios sanitários. Aprovamos uma estratégia para promover a cooperação e inovação aberta contra assimetrias na produção científica e tecnológica e decidimos estabelecer uma força-tarefa sobre a governança da inteligência artificial no G20. Neste ano, realizamos mais de 140 reuniões em 15 cidades brasileiras. Voltamos a adotar declarações consensuais em quase todos os grupos de trabalho. Deixamos a lição de que, quanto maior for a interação entre as trilhas de Sherpas e dinâmitas, maiores e mais significativos serão os resultados dos nossos países. Trabalhamos com afinco, mesmo cientes de que apenas arranhamos a superfície dos profundos desafios que o mundo tem que enfrentar. Depois da presidência sul-africana, todos os países do G20 terão exercido pelo menos uma vez a liderança do grupo. Será um momento propício para avaliar o papel que desempenhamos até agora e como devemos atuar daí em diante. Temos a responsabilidade de fazer melhor. É com essa esperança que é o martelo da presidência do G20 para o presidente Ramaphosa. Esta não é uma transmissão da presidência comum. É a expressão concreta dos vínculos históricos, econômicos, sociais e culturais que unem a América Latina e África. Agradeço a todos os que contribuíram com a presidência brasileira, em especial as pessoas que trabalharam para viabilizar os resultados que alcançamos. Desejo ao Coro Ramaphosa todo o sucesso na liderança do G20. A África poderá contar com o Brasil para exercer uma presidência que vá além do que podemos realizar. Lembro as palavras de outro grande sul-africano, Nelson Mandela, que disse: é fácil demolir e destruir. Os heróis são aqueles que constroem. Vamos seguir construindo um mundo justo e um planeta sustentável. Muito obrigado a todos e boa sorte, companheiro Ramaphosa. Eu os convido agora a assistir um vídeo sobre o G20 na África do Sul.
South Africa, born 30 years ago as a new nation, united and free from apartheid.
Yeah, there you have it, the very closing sessions of the G20 leaders meeting right here in Rio de Janeiro, with the final closing remarks delivered by the President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. And at the beginning of the closing remarks, albeit in Portuguese, we've just received the very translations of the remarks for the closing sessions by President Brazil. He extends first in the closing remarks his highest appreciation for the participation of the world leaders for this year's summit in Rio. And he said that this is the penultimate time for four developing economies within the G20 to host and to become the president of the G20. It starts with Indonesia, India, and now Brazil, and then the next developing economy to become or to assume the presidency of the G20 is South Africa. So he said that all these four developing economies, vibrant countries, will help shape the way developed economies assist the developing ones in terms of achieving progress. And he said that he's very proud of the achievement won for the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, involving 81 countries, 9 finance institutions around the globe to help fight hunger and to fight for more food productions and equal distributions to those in need around the globe. He also mentions the achievements in women empowerment of the G20 and, more importantly, the regulations for artificial intelligence, in which he said that it is something that has benefited a lot of key sectors in our lives and livelihoods of the people, but also poses a risk and threats to certain communities, and thus it is required not only for individuals' regulations, but a collective regulations of these member countries to agree on the use of artificial intelligence. It's also very proud of the fostered cooperations within the G20 member states. And at the end, during the moments of the handover presidency from Brazil to South Africa, President Lula da Silva mentioned that he can really see some ties between Latin America and their African counterparts, meaning that there are some resounding success from this particular presidencies and the outcomes that will be brought over to South Africa. Sharing the same veins of similarities. And he congratulated President Cyril Ramaphosa on assuming the next presidency. He will be at the helm throughout the year in 2025 in South Africa. And lastly, he quoted a very great leader of South Africa, which is Nelson Mandela. President Lula da Silva said, the great hero is not those who destroy, but the great hero is those who build. Very, very strong closing there from the President of Brazil, Lula da Silva. With that, we close our special coverage, our special reports from Rio de Janeiro, covering the whole deliberations of the leaders' meetings, the summits of G20 right here from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I'm Rahmat Idris and Danu Dirja behind the camera. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.
Eu os convido agora a...